What's up everybody? In today's video I'm going to show you how I removed and disassembled the damper on my Acura TSX. The shock is held from below by a damper fork that has two bolts in it. The lower bolt is a nut and bolt combination. To remove the lower bolt, hold the nut with a wrench and remove the bolt. You may need to wiggle on the damper fork in order to remove that bolt. Now remove the top bolt of the damper fork. Pull the damper fork down and towards you. You may need to push down on the rotor in order to get enough clearance. The top of the damper is held together by several nuts. Loosen those nuts, unthread them, but do not remove them completely. Hold the damper from below with one hand as you remove the nuts from the top. The shock and spring should be able to slide out towards the rear of the car. If you need more clearance, you can lift the lower control arm with your floor jack. You want to lubricate the threads on the spring compressors before you install them. Mount the spring compressors opposite of each other and lock in those safety tabs. I find it easier to compress using the bolt heads facing towards the bottom of the damper. Take turns compressing each side little by little. I stop when the spring moves freely from the damper mount. For the OEM shocks, you'll need to use a hex wrench to lock the shaft as you remove the nut. These are KYB shocks and they have a different way of removing the top nut. I use a ratcheting combination wrench to spin the nut, and I use a crescent wrench to hold the damper shaft. These KYB shocks are 2 months old, but I want to show you a compression test so you can get an idea of what normal compression looks like on new shock. For comparison, I have my Koni Sport shocks. They're about 5 years old with 40,000 miles on them. The KYB shock has smooth and consistent operation going down and going back up. The Koni shock goes down a little bit faster than the KYB shock and is 2 times slower than the KYB shock to come up. Here's a diagram of all the parts included in the OEM damper and spring unit. So here's the order of reassembly. First, insert the dust cover lower mount. If you have the dust cover and dust cover plate, go ahead and insert that. Then insert the spring. Next, the bump stop. Next is the upper mounting plate with the bushing and collars and the 2 washers. 1 washer goes on top and 1 washer goes on the bottom. Before locking the upper mounting plate, I use some silicone paste to lubricate the underside of the rubber mounting plate. This will help when aligning the damper with all of its parts. And last is the top nut. The next part is very important. There is an alignment tab at the bottom of the damper, and that needs to be aligned with the stud bolts at the top of the shock. To help align everything, I use my finger and touch the aligning tab at the bottom of the shock, and then eyeball all the way to the top thread to make sure that the top bolt is aligned with that. Now we have to torque the top nut to 22 foot-pounds. My torque wrench never reached 22 pounds, but it was firm and I couldn't spin it anymore. Here's how much that top bushing was compressed. Before you uncompress the spring, you want to make sure that the tab is aligned with the top studs. Okay, we're ready to uncompress that spring. Reinsert the shock by holding it with one hand and threading the top nuts with the other hand. Just hand tighten them for now. The top of the damper fork has a slot where that alignment tab on the shock is going to go into. Insert the fork into the bottom of the damper. Insert the lower bolt going towards the rear of the car. Hand tighten the upper bolt and the lower nut. Before you torque all the nuts and the bolts, you'll have to lift the lower control arm with your floor jack. Now you can torque everything to specifications. Thanks for watching this video. I will have updates, corrections, and links in the description of the video. Adios.